In the fading light of Britain's Pacific ambitions, with London eager to trim the sails of empire and Ottawa pressing westward with promise and persuasion, Frederick Seymour arrived as governor of British Columbia in 1864, a man charged not with building a colony, but with holding it together. He came with the manners of an English gentleman, the instinct of a cautious administrator, and the worldview of a Victorian official steeped in imperial orthodoxy. Born into a distinguished naval family, Seymour had served in British Honduras, where he earned a reputation for diplomacy and dignity, if not bold reform. British Columbia, with its raw frontier politics and economic woes, would demand more than administrative finesse. It would demand vision. Seymour, for all his talents, brought instead a deeply rooted instinct to resist the tide of democratic reform and continental consolidation. He arrived to a colony fractured by geography, debt, and diverging visions of its future. The gold rush was past its prime. The boom towns were thinning. Revenues from the caribou were no longer sufficient to service the debts incurred by Douglas's grand infrastructure projects. British Columbia, still a colony in name, but increasingly uncertain in soul, was adrift. In London, the Colonial Office expected calm governance and budgetary restraint, but the real political energy was no longer in London. It was in Ottawa, where Confederation had been proclaimed in 1867, and where a new generation of Canadian leaders, led by John A. Macdonald, envisioned a country stretching from sea to sea. In British Columbia, that vision found champions, men of ambition, business acumen, and a growing sense of disillusionment with Britain's distant rule. One of the most vocal among them was Armand de Cosmo, a fiery newspaper editor turned politician whose real name, William Smith, had been abandoned for something grander and more classical. He had long championed responsible government and saw Confederation as a lifeline, economic salvation, political renewal, and a route to modernity. De Cosmos used his newspaper, The British Colonist, to launch blistering editorials in favor of joining Canada, accusing Seymour and his council of maintaining a closed, undemocratic regime. Why should a handful of men appointed by distant patronage determine our fate, he wrote in 1867. Let us have union with Canada and the rights of free men. Alongside de Cosmo was John Robson, a sharp-minded journalist and legislator, and Dr. John Sebastian Helmeken, the Speaker of the Legislative Council and son-in-law to former Governor Douglas. Though Helmeken's views were more moderate, even he came to see economic necessity as making Confederation inevitable. Together, they represented a growing political class that saw in Canada a way out, a way to build railways, boost trade, and forge a future beyond British neglect. Seymour viewed these men with a mixture of suspicion and condescension. He distrusted de Cosmo's populism, fearing it would unleash instability. He believed Robson's vision was clouded by ambition, and he saw in their calls for responsible government a dangerous erosion of imperial authority. In private correspondence, Seymour dismissed the Confederation movement as the work of a few agitators whose interest in the matter exceeds their knowledge. He felt the colony was not yet mature enough to govern itself, and certainly not to gamble on a distant federation, still untested by geography or time. Yet the pressure mounted. Through 1867 and 1868, pro-Confederation meetings were held in Victoria and New Westminster. Petitions were drafted. Editorials filled the newspapers. Canadian agents, including Charles Tupper, a father of Confederation, began making quiet visits to assess the mood and prepare the way. Promises were whispered, a transcontinental railway, debt relief, even subsidies. These overtures alarmed Seymour. He feared above all that the colony would be bargained away, not as a willing partner, but as an imperial liability.
Governor Frederick Seymour arrives in 1864. in succession to James Douglas, to provide strength and unity in the mainland colony of British Columbia. He has, as his instructions call him, to bring consolidation to the economy and to the law and order situations that exist in the province, to deal with Indigenous affairs as required, and to have a steady civil administration that brings prosperity to the project of British Columbia. However, London had sent the wrong man, because Seymour was not only indolent, but he was misguided and not well versed in the politics of this amazing piece of real estate called British Columbia, with all its resources and all its needs. And he was lackadaisical in his attitudes. Now, he was not, as many people have said, anti-Confederation, but he was rather indifferent to the moving it forward. He didn't think that British Columbia was ready for the Confederation project. But, and if you look carefully at his dispatches as sent to London, you'll find a steady stream of support for the Confederation idea. But he's not in any way eager to move it forward rapidly. And hence we look back on him as being a somewhat misguided figure here, not a great figure for our movement towards a solid colony of British Columbia, moving towards a confederation with Canada.
Even within his own executive council, cracks began to show. Some advisors, mindful of the worsening economic picture and the colony's isolation, began to listen to Confederation arguments more closely. Seymour responded by tightening his circle, curbing reform efforts, and appealing to the Colonial Office to delay any action until the colony was more stable. "The people of the colony," he wrote to London, "are not of a mind to be absorbed by a distant dominion they have never seen, nor traded with, nor trusted." But that statement, too, was slipping out of date. British Columbia's economic crisis deepened. The cost of administration mounted. Trade with San Francisco became dominant, and Britain's own resolve weakened. The Foreign Office began to suggest, more explicitly, that Confederation was the most sensible future. Seymour was instructed to remain neutral in public, but in private, it was made clear that he should keep all options open. In the language of empire, neutrality often meant stepping aside. Still, Seymour resisted. He believed British Columbia could persevere as a standalone British colony, perhaps eventually granted dominion status like Canada or New Zealand. He imagined the Pacific colony evolving into a loyal, self-sufficient outpost of empire. But he was increasingly a man out of step with his time, governing a colony that could no longer afford such ideals. In 1869, while inspecting the northern coast during unrest in Indigenous territories near the Nass River, Seymour fell ill. Exhausted, isolated, and possibly infected by dysentery or malaria, he died suddenly at Bella Coola on June 10th, aged only 44. His death, though unexpected, was not merely a personal tragedy. It marked the end of an era. The imperial vision he clung to had lost its purchase. Within weeks, Anthony Musgrave, a seasoned colonial administrator, loyal to London's goals, was appointed to replace him. Unlike Seymour, Musgrave came with a clear mandate: bring British Columbia into Canada, and do so swiftly. In the end, Frederick Seymour was not overthrown, nor humiliated, nor publicly contradicted, but he was overtaken by events, by economic necessity, and by the persistent tide of history. He believed in the empire's paternal hand, not Ottawa's political handshake. He saw Confederation as a threat to stability, not a path to it, and he stood firm, almost alone, against a growing chorus of local voices who believed the future of British Columbia lay not across the sea, but across the mountains. He was a man of the last hour of the previous age, not the first light of the next. He governed with honor, but not vision, and history, unsentimental as ever, moved on. Join us next time for part 14 of the Canada History Society's 20-part series as we explore Foreign Office Pressure, a British strategy.